The wind whipped Eleanor's hair across her face, each gust more ferocious than the last. She stood on the cliff feeling the raw power of nature all around her. It stung her cheeks, cold and sharp like tiny needles pricking her skin. The cold was relentless, seeping through her clothes and chilling her to the bone. Below, the waves crashed against the rocks with a deafening roar. The sea was a wild beast, untamed and furious, its waves rising and falling in a chaotic dance. A maelstrom of white foam and dark water churned below, a visual representation of the turmoil within her. The sea mirrored her inner conflict, a storm of emotions she couldn't control. Her heart hammered in her chest, each beat a frantic drum against her ribs. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, heightening her senses. It was a frantic drum against her ribs, a constant reminder of her fear. She clutched at her chest, trying to calm the wild rhythm, but it was no use. This cliff, she thought, had an almost magnetic pull. It was as if the edge called to her, beckoning her closer with an irresistible force. It beckoned her closer to the edge, a siren's call that she found hard to resist. She took a step closer, peering down at the tumultuous sea below. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was a sensation that clung to her, making her skin crawl and her heart race even faster. Eyes boring into her back, unseen but unmistakable. She turned her head, scanning the landscape for any sign of another presence. A presence lurking just beyond her sight, hidden among the rocks and trees. It was an unsettling sensation, one that made her feel vulnerable and exposed. It was an unsettling sensation, one that she couldn't ignore. Her eyes darted around nervously, searching for the source of her unease. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled with a sudden chill. It was as if the very air around her was charged with electricity, a warning of impending danger. The wind seemed to whisper a warning, its voice carried on the gusts that whipped around her. Or was it her own fear she heard, amplified by the howling wind? Or was it her own fear she heard? The line between reality and imagination blurred, leaving her unsure of what was real and what was a product of her anxiety. Eleanor took a hesitant step back from the precipice, her instincts urging her to retreat. The ground felt unstable beneath her feet, as if it could give way at any moment. The ground felt unstable beneath her feet, shifting slightly with each step. It was as if the very earth wanted to reject her, to push her away from the edge, as if the very earth wanted to reject her, to cast her away from the precipice. Loose gravel slid down the cliffside, a reminder of the danger that lay below. She longed for the safety of the manor, its cold stone walls and heavy oak doors, a fortress against the chaos outside. It was a place of refuge, a sanctuary from the storm. With its cold stone walls and heavy oak doors, it seemed a fortress compared to this exposed cliff face. But even within those walls, could she truly escape the feeling of being stalked? But even within those walls, could she truly escape the feeling of being stalked? The sense of dread followed her, a shadow that clung to her every step, no matter where she went. Back in the confines of her room, Eleanor tried to calm her racing thoughts, but the silence of the manor was almost as unnerving as the wind on the cliff. It was a heavy, oppressive silence, the kind that seemed to amplify every creak of the floorboards and sigh of the wind through the eaves. The fear was a living thing inside her. It coiled in the pit of her stomach, cold and slithering. A voice whispered in the back of her mind, feeding her paranoia. She tried to ignore it, to rationalize the fear away. But the voice persisted, relentless and insidious. She paced the length of her room, each step heavy with dread. The shadows seemed to stretch and dance in the flickering candlelight, taking on sinister, distorted shapes. Was that a flicker of movement in the corner of her eye, or just a trick of the light? Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, each beat a terrifying echo in the silence. The next morning, Eleanor sought refuge in the garden. The garden had always been her sanctuary, a place where she could escape the chaos of the world and find a moment of peace. The early morning light cast a golden hue over the dew-kissed flowers, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming roses. Eleanor took a deep breath, letting the tranquility of the garden wash over her. A young construction worker, Tom, was repairing a section of the crumbling wall. He had been working on the renovations for weeks, and his presence had become a familiar sight in the garden. Tom was diligent and focused, his hands moving skillfully as he worked. Eleanor watched him for a moment, appreciating the sense of normalcy he brought to her otherwise tumultuous life. His presence was a comfort, a beacon of normalcy in the growing storm of her fear. Eleanor found herself drawn to his steady demeanor, the way he seemed unfazed by the world around him. It was as if he carried a piece of serenity with him, and she couldn't help but feel a little more at ease in his company. She approached him, her steps tentative but hopeful. His smile was kind, his eyes crinkled at the corners. "Good morning, Eleanor," he greeted her warmly. His voice was gentle, a stark contrast to the harshness of the world outside the garden walls. Eleanor returned his smile, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It was a small moment, but it meant the world to her. He spoke of mundane things, the weather, the progress of the renovations, the local gossip. His words were simple, but they carried a weight of normalcy that Eleanor desperately needed. She listened intently, allowing herself to be drawn into the rhythm of his voice. It was a welcome distraction from the worries that plagued her mind. His words were a soothing balm to her frayed nerves. Each sentence, each casual remark helped to ease the tension that had been building inside her. Eleanor felt herself relax, her shoulders dropping as the weight of her fears lifted, if only for a moment. She realized how much she had missed these simple human interactions. For a precious few moments, Eleanor forgot her fear. She allowed herself to be present in the moment, to enjoy the conversation and the company. It was a rare gift, this feeling of peace, and she cherished it deeply. She laughed at one of Tom's jokes, the sound surprising her with its lightness. She allowed herself to be drawn into his easy conversation. They talked about everything and nothing, their words weaving a tapestry of connection that felt both fragile and strong. Eleanor found herself sharing stories from her past, memories that she had kept locked away for so long. Tom listened with genuine interest, his eyes never leaving hers. The warmth of the sun on her face, the scent of freshly turned earth, the sound of birdsong in the air. These were the things that grounded her, that reminded her of the beauty in the world. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sensations wash over her. It was a reminder that life, despite its challenges, still held moments of grace. But even in this moment of relative peace, a shadow lingered at the edge of her awareness. It was a constant companion, this sense of unease that she couldn't quite shake. No matter how hard she tried to focus on the present, the worries of the future loomed large in her mind. She frowned slightly, the weight of her thoughts pulling her back to reality. A sense of unease she couldn't shake. It was like a dark cloud hovering just out of sight, always threatening to overshadow her moments of happiness. Eleanor's eyes darted around the garden, scanning for any signs of danger. She knew it was irrational, but she couldn't help it. The fear was always there, lurking in the background. It manifested in the way she constantly scanned the perimeter of the garden. Her eyes never stayed in one place for long, always moving, always searching. It was a habit she had developed over time, a way to keep herself safe. But it also kept her from fully enjoying the present moment. She sighed, wishing she could let go of her fears, if only for a little while. In the way her gaze darted to the tree line, searching for any sign of movement. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. Eleanor knew that the danger she feared was unlikely to come from the garden, but her mind couldn't help but imagine all the worst-case scenarios. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Peace, she realized, was a fragile thing in this place, easily shattered. It was a delicate balance, this dance between fear and tranquility. Eleanor knew that she couldn't let her guard down completely, but she also knew that she needed these moments of solace to keep going. She looked at Tom, his presence a reminder that she wasn't alone in this struggle. And for now, that was enough. Section 4, Roses of Blood Red. A bouquet of blood-red roses arrived later that day, delivered to the front door with no card, no message, just a dozen crimson blooms tied with a black ribbon. The sight of them sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew with a certainty that defied logic who had sent them. Red roses, they were his calling card, a twisted symbol of affection from a man who instilled nothing but terror. The thorns, she thought, were a fitting metaphor for his love, beautiful on the surface but hiding a sharp, painful reality beneath. The scent of the roses filled the room. It was cloying, overpowering, a suffocating reminder of his unseen presence. Eleanor refused to touch the flowers. She couldn't bear the thought of their velvety petals brushing against her skin. It felt like a violation, a tangible reminder that he was closing in, that he was always watching, always one step ahead. The roses were a promise, she realized, and a threat. Section 5. Walls that cannot keep him out. The title itself evokes a sense of foreboding, a chilling reminder that some threats cannot be barred by mere physical barriers. The renovations on the manor continued. Day after day, the workers toiled, their efforts focused on restoring the grandeur of the old house. The scaffolding rose higher, encasing the manor in a skeletal embrace of metal and wood. The constant hammering and sawing were both a comfort and a source of anxiety. The rhythmic pounding of hammers and the sharp whine of saws filled the air, a cacophony of progress. Yet, with each strike, Eleanor's nerves frayed a little more. It was reassuring to know that the house was being made stronger, more secure. The walls, once crumbling and weak, were now fortified with new materials, promising safety and stability. But could these walls truly keep out the darkness that haunted her? But the noise also served as a constant reminder of her vulnerability. Every clang of metal and thud of wood was a stark contrast to the silence she craved, a silence that would never come as long as the renovations continued. Every time a floorboard creaked or a door slammed shut, Eleanor's heart would leap into her throat. The old house was full of such noises, each one a potential harbinger of doom. She would freeze, listening intently, her breath caught in her chest. Was it just the wind, or was he inside the house? The question gnawed at her, an ever-present worry that refused to be silenced. The wind howled through the gaps in the old windows, creating ghostly whispers that set her on edge. Had he found a way past the scaffolding and the workmen? The thought was terrifying. The workers were supposed to be her shield, their presence a deterrent to any would-be intruder. But what if he was cleverer than they anticipated? The fear was a constant shadow. It clung to her, an invisible cloak that weighed her down. No matter where she went, it followed, a silent companion that never left her side. It followed her from room to room, whispering doubts and suspicions in her ear. Sleep offered little respite. Even in the sanctuary of her bedroom, she felt its presence, lurking in the corners, waiting for her to let her guard down. Her dreams were haunted by images of the stalker. Night after night, she would find herself trapped in a labyrinth of fear, his shadowy figure always just a step behind. She would wake, drenched in sweat, her heart racing. His face was always obscured, shrouded in shadow. No matter how hard she tried, she could never see his features clearly. It was as if the darkness itself conspired to keep his identity hidden, but his eyes were cold and calculating. They were the only part of him that she could see clearly, and they terrified her. They seemed to pierce through the darkness, locking onto her with a predatory intensity. They burned into her, filled with a chilling intensity that made her skin crawl. She could feel their gaze on her even when she was alone, a constant reminder that she was never truly safe. She would wake in a cold sweat, her heart pounding, the echo of his gaze lingering in the darkness. The fear was inescapable, a relentless force that dominated her every waking moment and haunted her dreams.